At night, at a major company, a high-ranking executive was leaving work when he saw a night cleaner quietly taking a leftover meal. Curious, he followed her through the cold streets and into a run-down neighborhood, where he saw her feed two hungry children in a nearly empty apartment. What started as quiet observation became unexpected help, never knowing it would spark a change that would transform hundreds of lives, including his own, forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. Ethan Shaw believed in one thing above all else: hard work pays off. He wasn't born into wealth, didn't inherit a family business, and didn't climb some ladder with someone holding it steady for him. No, he built his career from the ground up, with sore hands, sleepless nights, and a stubborn refusal to quit. Years ago, he'd started in the back of a shipping warehouse on the edge of Chicago's industrial zone, moving boxes, cleaning spills, learning the business one forklift pallet at a time. And now he sat in a corner office at Stratline Distribution's sleek new headquarters, just outside downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline view he had once only seen on postcards. He was the CEO, not because he chased attention or headlines, but because no one understood the machine better than he did. He made the schedules, signed off on logistics contracts, tracked freight margins, and made sure the wheels kept turning. And beyond the numbers, he shaped the vision. From operations to culture. Every decision, every system, every outcome bore his fingerprint. He was respected, even feared by some. Not because he was cruel, but because he expected excellence. You gave your best, or you gave nothing at all. He paid his employees well. Not generously, but fairly. On time, every time. He believed that was enough. If you wanted more, you worked more. If you had problems, you solved them. That's how he did it. That's how America worked, at least in his eyes. He didn't pry into people's lives. He didn't ask what they did after hours, and he expected the same in return. Personal issues weren't excuses, they were distractions, and distractions didn't ship product. Every Monday, Ethan walked the warehouse floor. He nodded to team leads, asked about load times, checked the temperature in cold storage, and kept mental notes of who was focused and who wasn't. He didn't waste time on small talk. He liked numbers, percentages, efficiencies. He liked knowing that because of the systems he helped design, packages moved faster, fuel costs dropped, delivery times improved. That was how you measured value, in metrics, not emotion. That evening, like most evenings, he stayed late. It was quiet now, the buzz of daytime movement replaced by a kind of heavy silence that only came after hours, when the building felt hollow and still. Ethan liked it that way. He could think. Review reports, catch errors others missed. He sat in his glass office, staring at spreadsheets that told him everything about how the company was performing, but nothing about the people behind the numbers. Not that it mattered. To him, numbers were enough. But that night, something pulled his attention away. Something small, insignificant really. At the far end of the hallway, past the operations wing and the dim glow of the break room lights, someone was still moving. That was unusual. Cleaning crews came and went quietly, barely noticeable, but this wasn't just movement. This was someone lingering. He stood up, curious but not yet concerned, and walked closer to the break room's glass pane. There, by the vending machines, stood a woman he recognized but didn't know. Lena Morris, if he recalled correctly. Night shift custodian. Late 30s, quiet, punctual. Never late, never missed a day, never complained. She stood stiffly near the counter, shifting from one foot to the other, glancing at the clock, then at the cafeteria's kitchen door. Ethan watched as the back door creaked open and one of the kitchen staff, Marco maybe, stepped out. Their exchange was hushed, too quiet for Ethan to hear, but it didn't take much to understand. The man hesitated, clearly unsure, then finally reached under the counter and pulled out a white foam takeout container. Lena looked down, her shoulders sagging just slightly with what looked like relief. She said thank you, barely above a whisper, then slipped the box into her oversized tote bag and looked around nervously before heading toward the exit. Ethan stood still, watching through the glass. Something about it didn't sit right with him, not because she took food, God knows they threw out enough leftovers every night, but because of how she took it, like it was a secret, like it was wrong, and why did she need to ask for it in the first place? She worked 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She was reliable. That's the kind of worker he always said the company needed. Someone who didn't complain, who just got it done. She should have been able to afford a meal. She should have been okay. But she wasn't. He could feel it. And for the first time in years, a thought crept into his mind that he couldn't shake. What if hard work isn't enough? He returned to his desk, tried to focus on the performance dashboard blinking on his screen. But the numbers meant nothing now, not when all he could see was a woman quietly taking a leftover meal as if it were stolen and tucking it away like something shameful. And, suddenly, Ethan Shaw, man of order, of numbers, of earned success, felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Doubt. And that, more than anything else, made him uneasy. But that doubt, once planted, didn't go away. It followed Ethan as he shut down his laptop, slipped on his coat, and stepped into the cool night air outside the Stratline building. The parking lot was mostly empty now, just a few scattered cars under the yellow-orange glow of the lamps. He didn't normally leave this late, but tonight wasn't normal. Something had changed. He spotted Lena in the distance, walking briskly toward the bus stop at the edge of the lot. No car, no waiting ride, just her, a heavy tote slung over one shoulder and that same quiet urgency in her step. Ethan paused near the door, the weight of the decision pressing against him. This wasn't something he did. He didn't follow employees. He didn't cross lines. But tonight his feet moved before his logic could catch up. He kept a distance as he walked, not wanting to draw attention. Lena stood under the flickering streetlight, arms wrapped around her coat, staring straight ahead. When the city bus pulled up, its brakes hissing like an exhale, she stepped on without hesitation. Ethan hesitated only a second before boarding behind her, paying his fare and sliding into a seat near the back. The bus was nearly empty, filled only with silence, the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of overhead lights casting everyone in short bursts of harsh white. Lena sat near the middle, her body slightly slumped, her head resting against the cold window. She didn't check her phone, didn't fidget, didn't move. She just stared outside with a blankness that didn't come from boredom, it came from exhaustion. It's not the kind of exhaustion that a good night's sleep could fix. No, this was something deeper. The kind that seeps into your bones when you've carried too much for too long without letting go. Ethan studied her from afar, silent. For all his years tracking employee output, he had never once considered what happened after shifts ended. To him, work was work. You showed up, you performed, you went home. But what if going home wasn't rest? What if it was just more survival? The bus rolled past the familiar parts of town. The warehouses, the gas stations, the late-night diners, glowing with soft neon light. But then the scenery began to change. The roads cracked. The buildings grew older, smaller, fewer lights, fewer people. The edges of the city forgotten by time and by wealth. Ethan realized, with a quiet discomfort, that this was still Chicago. But not the Chicago he knew. Lena didn't look alarmed. She didn't check where she was. She knew the route like routine. When she finally pulled the stop cord, it was with the certainty of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. As the bus came to a halt, she adjusted the strap on her bag, pulled her jacket closer around her body, and stepped into the shadows of a block Ethan had never driven through, let alone walked in. Again he followed. At a distance, the sidewalks here were uneven, the fences rusted, the porches barely lit. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't well cared for either. A kind of quiet resignation lingered in the air, like the people here didn't expect much anymore. Lena moved through it all like someone used to the terrain, past sagging mailboxes, past cracked steps, past the silence, until she reached an apartment building that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. Ethan slowed near the corner, careful not to be seen. He stood behind the shadow of a tree as Lena climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, pulled out a key, and opened the door to a unit with peeling paint and a dented metal number. She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. Ethan approached just enough to see through a sliver of yellowed curtain. What he saw inside stopped him cold. The apartment wasn't empty. It wasn't new. It was bare, but not the kind of bare that came with just moving in. It was the kind of bare that came from having nothing for a very long time. There was no couch, no table, just a single mattress on the floor, a few folded blankets, a plastic crate stacked neatly with clothes. And then, two small children peeked out from behind the mattress, a boy and a girl, no older than 5 or 6. Ethan's stomach turned. Lena knelt beside them, her movements slow, deliberate but gentle. She reached into her tote and pulled out the white takeout container, the one she had tucked away at the office. She opened it carefully like it was something fragile and set it between them. The children didn't wait. They moved quickly, hungrily, not like kids grabbing a snack, but like they hadn't eaten in hours. She split the meal evenly, made sure they each got their share, but she didn't eat. She just watched. Ethan stood there, frozen in place, watching a mother give everything she had to her children and somehow still smile. The weight of it pressed into his chest. He had spent years perfecting systems, pushing performance, believing effort was always enough. But now he saw it. This wasn't about effort. This was about survival. And just when he thought the night couldn't press any harder against his conscience, he heard a small voice through the window. A girl's voice. "Mommy, are we going to have breakfast tomorrow?" Lena paused, just a beat, and then smoothed her daughter's hair back gently. "Of course, baby," she whispered. "I'll figure it out." She smiled as she said it, but Ethan saw it for what it was, a shield, a fragile smile meant to protect her daughter from a truth too heavy for a child to carry. That was the moment something in him cracked, because that answer, that brave little lie told with love, carried more courage than any business deal he'd ever made. He took a step back from the window, his breath unsteady. This wasn't just about one woman. This wasn't just about one meal. It was about a system that let someone like Lena work so hard and still wonder if her kids would eat in the morning. Ethan turned toward the street, the night pressing cold against his face. He didn't know what he was going to do yet. But for the first time in his career, he knew he couldn't look away. And as he walked back toward the bus stop in silence, his mind was already racing, because come morning, he wouldn't be the same man sitting behind that desk. The next morning, Ethan Shaw sat at his desk, staring at the familiar glow of his laptop screen. But the numbers, once his gospel, now blurred into meaningless shapes. For years he had lived by data, budgets, and logistics, every decision rooted in efficiency and output, but none of it mattered now. Not after what he had seen the night before, not after watching a woman who worked every bit as hard as anyone in the company come home to an empty apartment and split a leftover meal between 2 children like it was treasure. He had spent half the night pacing, trying to shake the image of Lena's smile, that tired, brave mask she wore for her daughter's sake, trying to convince himself that maybe it wasn't his problem, that he had done his part. She had a job, she got paid, that should have been enough. That's what he'd always believed, that's what the system told him. But it didn't feel right anymore. It felt hollow, cold, wrong. A soft knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked up, and there stood his assistant, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Shaw, Lena Morris is here to see you." He straightened in his chair, heart jumping slightly. He hadn't asked for her, hadn't decided how or if he should bring it up. But now she was here. Voluntarily. That meant something. "Send her in," he said quietly. The door opened and Lena stepped inside, her posture tense, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked exhausted, just as she had the night before. But her eyes held something else now, something guarded. She moved like someone bracing for impact, like someone used to defending herself before the first word was even spoken. She sat down across from him, straight-backed and composed. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Her voice was professional, steady, but there was no warmth in it, no trust. Ethan studied her for a moment, unsure how to begin. He had rehearsed half a dozen ways to approach this conversation, but now that she was here, none of them felt right. So he just said it. "I saw you last night." She froze. It was slight, but he caught it. The quick inhale, the flicker in her eyes. "Excuse me?" Her voice cracked just a little. "I followed you," Ethan continued carefully, calmly. "I saw you take that food home. I saw your apartment, your kids." Her hands tensed into fists in her lap. For a second, her whole body shifted like she was deciding whether to stand up and walk out or say something sharp. But she didn't move. She just looked at him, eyes narrowing. I don't understand." But she did. She understood perfectly. He could see it in the way her jaw clenched, the way her shoulders squared like armor, locking into place. This wasn't a new experience for her. She had been judged before. She had been in this room, or one like it, too many times. "I'm not here to judge you," Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "And I'm not here to pity you either." Her eyes searched his, as if trying to find the lie, to find the trick. She wasn't used to being looked at as anything but a burden or a problem, but she didn't interrupt. She waited. He took a breath. "I'm here because I should have seen it sooner. And I want to fix it." Her lip trembled. Not enough to cry, just enough to betray the weight of what she was holding in. She blinked hard and looked down. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes, I do," he replied, voice steady, firm. There was a long pause. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of everything unsaid. Ethan opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the desk toward her. Lena didn't move. Her eyes flicked down to it, then back to his face. "This isn't charity," Ethan said gently, before she could object. "This is an investment. In you. In the people who make this company run." She still didn't reach for it. She looked at him, lips parted, but no words came. "I want to raise wages," he continued, "adjust hours, provide child care assistance, emergency support, whatever it takes to make sure nobody goes home the way you did last night." Her fingers twitched, then hovered over the envelope, but she pulled them back like the paper burned to the touch. "Why?" she asked finally. It wasn't angry. It wasn't suspicious. It was just tired. Tired in a way that asked, why now? Why me? Why care? Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because I built this company," he said, his voice low, quiet, honest. "And somewhere along the way I let people fall through the cracks. I refuse to let that happen again." Lena looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she reached out. Her fingers grazed the envelope before gripping it, pulling it gently toward her like it might vanish if she wasn't careful. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. She didn't cry. She wasn't used to crying in front of anyone. She wasn't used to anyone even seeing her. Ethan met her gaze, his own steady. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Lena's throat bobbed slightly as she swallowed. Then she nodded, once, small but full of meaning. A moment later she stood, clutching the envelope to her chest like it was something sacred, and as she turned to leave, shoulders squared and head high, Ethan felt something inside him settle. Not guilt, not relief. Something heavier, something permanent. This wasn't just about one woman anymore. This wasn't about a meal, or a mistake, or a kind gesture. This was about everything he hadn't seen before. And as the door clicked shut behind her, Ethan Shaw knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had to act. And not tomorrow. Today. As the door closed and Lena disappeared down the hall, Ethan remained still, his hands resting flat on the desk, eyes fixed on the empty chair across from him. The conversation had ended, but the weight of it hadn't left the room. If anything, it had grown heavier, sinking into his chest like stone. He couldn't go back to spreadsheets and shipping schedules, not after that. not after hearing a mother whisper a promise to her child that she didn't know how to keep, not after seeing the quiet resignation in Lena's eyes as she prepared to defend her dignity against yet another man in a suit. He had power, real power, and for the first time he saw clearly what it meant to use it. He pushed back from his desk, stood up, and reached for his phone. His finger hovered for only a second before dialing a number he rarely used directly. The call barely rang once before a voice answered on the other end. Sharp, professional, efficient. Lisa Park. She was Stratline's chief financial officer and had been with the company since the beginning. They'd built the operation together, brick by brick, number by number. As CEO, Ethan rarely made urgent calls like this, but tonight wasn't about protocol. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Didn't expect to hear from you before the board meeting next week. What's going on?" Ethan didn't ease into it. He didn't need to. "I need to talk payroll," he said, "benefits, emergency assistance programs, and I need to talk about it today." There was a pause, just a beat, and then the sound of typing on a keyboard in the background. Lisa's tone shifted slightly, less casual now, more alert. "You're not the type to make impulsive calls, Ethan. What happened?" He hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he wasn't sure how to say it. How to explain what it felt like to stand on a sidewalk and watch children eat a leftover meal with the kind of hunger you only understand when you've gone without. How to explain the crack in his worldview. But this was Lisa. If anyone could follow, it was her. "Let's just say I finally saw something I should have seen a long time ago," he said quietly. Another pause, another few keystrokes, then her voice returned. "Okay, tell me what you're thinking." Ethan exhaled, forcing his thoughts into something structured, something real. "We need to raise wages. I don't mean by a couple cents just to keep up with inflation. I mean something meaningful, something that actually changes lives, and I want a full plan, cost projections, tier breakdowns, long-term retention forecasts." Lisa made a sound, a low hum that meant she was already running numbers in her head. "That's a major shift," she said. "We've got investors watching margins like hawks. There's going to be pushback." "Let them push," Ethan replied, his voice calm but firm. "We're a distribution company. We move product. We keep the supply chain alive, but the only reason we're as good as we are is because of the people on the ground. The warehouse crews, the drivers, the ones pulling 16-hour shifts and not complaining. If we don't take care of them, then we're not the company we think we are." Lisa didn't respond right away. When she did, her tone was no longer skeptical. It was thoughtful. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious," Ethan said without hesitation. There was a silence, but it wasn't resistance. It was respect. "All right," she said at last. "I'll run the numbers. I'll draft models for tiered wage increases, cost numeral fund reallocation, and options for added benefits. You want to add emergency support too?" "Yes, and childcare assistance. Maybe tuition support for employees trying to move up. I don't want band-aids, Lisa. I want long-term solutions, systems, safety nets, things that actually work." Lisa let out a small, surprised laugh, not mocking, but maybe even a little impressed. "Well, damn," she said. "Looks like somebody had a wake-up call." Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, the memory of Lena's apartment still etched into his mind like a scar. "Yeah, something like that." "Okay," Lisa said, her voice shifting back into high gear. "Give me a few hours. I'll have a preliminary report ready by the end of the day." Then her tone turned serious again. "But Ethan, if we do this, it's going to be a fight. The board, the investors, even some of the senior managers, they're not all going to be on your side." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. He thought of Lena's hands wrapped around that envelope. He thought of her children, of the silence in their apartment, of the quiet question that haunted him. "Mommy, are we going to have breakfast tomorrow?" "Then we fight," he said, his voice like stone. Lisa chuckled. "Damn right we do. I'll call you when I've got numbers." The line went dead, and Ethan stood alone in his office, but for the first time in a long time, the pressure in his chest didn't feel like weight. It felt like purpose. This wasn't about metrics anymore. It wasn't about quarterly goals or shipping speeds. It was about doing the right thing. And as he looked out the window, watching a new wave of employees arrive for the morning shift, shoulders hunched, eyes tired, lunch bags in hand, he knew exactly what had to happen next. It was time to face the board. The boardroom was silent, the kind of silence that carried weight. Ethan stood at the head of the long glass table, fingers steepled in front of him, eyes steady as he surveyed the faces surrounding him. Sharp suits, polished expressions, people who spent their days analyzing numbers, profit forecasts, and market trends, but had never once set foot in the loading dock, never spoken to a night cleaner, never pulled a double shift in a freezing warehouse. Lisa Park sat beside him, her face unreadable, but he knew her well enough to sense the gears turning behind her eyes. She had come prepared as always. Reports printed, data color-coded, risk models mapped out to the decimal. But even with the logic in hand, Ethan knew this wouldn't be easy. Daniel Cross, one of Stratline's longest-standing investors, leaned back in his leather chair, arms crossed, tone skeptical. "Let me get this straight," he said, voice smooth but tight. "You're proposing an across-the-board wage increase, expanded benefits, a company-funded emergency assistance program, and more flexible hours? And you want us to approve all of that? Why?" Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "Because it's the right thing to do." There was a beat of silence, followed by a scoff from someone farther down the table. Another voice spoke, sharper this time. "Come on, Ethan. We don't run a charity. We run a business. Our employees are already paid competitively. If we start handing out raises like candy, where does it stop? What do you think shareholders will say when margins dip?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He had expected this, had rehearsed this. He leaned forward, voice calm but unwavering. "We're a distribution company. We don't make apps, we don't build cars, we move things. And the reason we move them better than anyone else is because of the people who show up at 4 a.m., who drive through snowstorms, who lift until their backs give out. They are not numbers. They're the reason this company works." Lisa slid a report across the table. "We've run the numbers," she said clearly. "Yes, this plan comes with upfront costs, but high turnover rates are already bleeding us dry. Hiring, training, lost productivity. It's killing us faster than any raise ever could. Investing in people now is the only sustainable path forward." Across the table, a silver-haired woman named Margaret, one of their most senior board members, frowned but didn't dismiss the report. She scanned the summary with a practiced eye. "So you're saying this is about survival?" Ethan nodded. "It's about loyalty, about building a workplace people want to stay in. If we don't take care of our employees, someone else will, and they'll leave. They already are." Another silence settled over the room. This one less confrontational, more calculating. Some board members glanced at each other. Others reread the data. Ethan could see it happening in real time. The mental math, the weighing of risk versus reward. But then Daniel leaned forward again, arms still crossed. "And what if you're wrong? What if we do all of this and still lose money?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Then I take the loss personally." That got their attention. The room shifted. Lisa's head snapped toward him, surprised. A murmur rippled down the table. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean, exactly?" Ethan's voice didn't waver. "It means I'll cut my own salary. If that's what it takes to make this work, I'll do it. I built this company. If it fails because of this, then I take responsibility." Silence again, but not the same kind. This one was heavier, more respectful. And then, after a long pause, Margaret set the report down and looked around the table. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time we started thinking beyond just the next quarter." I vote yes. One by one the votes followed. Not all in agreement, not without hesitation, but enough. Enough to change everything. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan stepped out into the hallway, Lisa beside him. The hum of the office surrounded them. Phones ringing, forklifts beeping in the distance, workers checking manifests and loading docks humming with movement. It was the same as always, but to Ethan, it all looked different now. Lisa gave him a sidelong glance as they walked. "When you said you were serious," she muttered, "I didn't think you meant your own damn salary. Ethan let out a low breath, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It worked, didn't it?" Lisa shook her head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. "Yeah, it did." They stopped near the elevators. Ethan looked out over the open office floor, at the people who kept the company alive, day in and day out, whose stories he had never really known until now. Lena wasn't the only one. There were dozens, hundreds like her. And if his eyes had been closed before, they weren't anymore. He didn't just believe in hard work now. He believed in something bigger, something better. Lisa folded her arms. "So now that we've got board approval," she asked, "who's going to tell the employees?" Ethan rolled his shoulders back, his gaze firm. "I am," he said. Lisa raised a brow. "You sure? This is going to be a shock." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, that's why they need to hear it from me." And as he stepped forward, already moving toward the floor, toward the people who deserved more than just a paycheck, Ethan Shaw felt something he hadn't felt in years, not pressure, not stress, but purpose. Because this wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was about all of them, every worker, every shift, every silent sacrifice made just to survive. And finally, someone was listening. Finally, something was going to change. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.